Dr. Michael Brown is a dear friend to our ministry and a Jewish believer. He's an international speaker, media personality, and author who speaks on themes of spiritual renewal and cultural reformation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Brown.
Always glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you with us, and we just want to dive right in. What's even happening in America in regards to the conflict and the unrest that is unraveling between Israel and Hamas and in Palestine? You know, we're seeing right now across the country that there's pro-Israel and pro-Palestine protests that are breaking out. What is your take on what's happening right now in our country?
Let's put things in two different categories. Let's say that there are many people who have different views on Israel and the Palestinians, and who feel that Israel is an occupier or doesn't treat the Palestinians fairly and things like that. So those are discussions we can have. Or does Israel have a right to be in the land? Or is Israel today fulfillment of a prophecy? Those are discussions we can have. What Hamas did is barbaric, inhuman, and anyone protesting for Hamas or having a pro-Palestinian demonstration at this moment is on the wrong side of morality. You are talking about more than 10 times the decimation that 9/11 brought about in terms of loss of life. In wounded, it would be over 115,000 wounded if you compute the population, Jewish population of Israel to America. 5,000 plus people taken hostage into Afghanistan. In one village, Israeli soldiers just found 40 babies and children that were executed, babies beheaded. So this barbarism is beyond anything that we have seen. It is the most horrific loss of Jewish life in any one day since the Holocaust. This is not the time for a pro-Palestinian demonstration. And when you have pro-Hamas demonstrators in Australia, for example, at the Sydney Opera House, chanting, "Gas the Jews," not even gas the Israelis, which would be barbaric enough, but gas the Jews, you have to realize this is demonic, this is insidious. This is a time when all decent people should say there's no possible justification for what Hamas did. Israel obviously must defend itself and deal with Hamas. But please, if you're pro-Palestinian, let us look for a peaceful solution for the future. Fine, but there's a time and place for everything. Now is the time for the universal condemnation of Hamas by every person of decency, especially followers of Jesus.
Yeah, so true, Dr. Brown, because even I just recently heard that, President Biden was just saying, we stand with Israel. I mean, we're taking a stand for justice, because even what you're sharing, I think sometimes it's hard for us. Like, we cannot be desensitized of what is going on. I mean, I've even seen videos and pictures of women that have been raped and they're bleeding from their pants and are standing in the street. I mean, this is what's happening and what is going on. And, Dr. Brown, what would you say to that person, though, that is still like, well, they're, Palestine, they're fighting their oppressor, and I'm going to stand on this. And what about the Christians in Palestine? What would you say to that person that is still is on the other side of the fence and truly cannot fathom and comprehend?
That's your baby that they just murdered. That's your baby that they just beheaded. That's your wife that they just raped and paraded her naked body down the street shouting Allahu Akbar. How dare you compare that to anything that Israel's done? Show me Israel raping Palestinian women and dragging their corpses through the city as Israelis chant praises to God. Show me Israelis willingly, knowingly going into Palestinian villages and slaughtering children, and willfully, knowingly. If such a thing happened, there'd be outrage all over the nation of Israel. So it's a totally separate matter. This is not the oppressor having the resistance fight back. If Hamas launched a military attack on Israeli soldiers, I would still deplore it, but that's a totally different thing. That would be okay. They're the oppressed ones and they're fighting against the oppressor. It's a completely different outlook. Look, there are Muslims around the world who are outraged by this. There are Muslims posting on our social media pages saying this is not Islam. Others are saying death to the Jews. So we really need to make a distinction here. Now, when this war is over, there will have been more Palestinian civilians killed than Israeli civilians. That is regrettable. Israel regrets it. We should be praying for everyone in the region. My heart breaks right now for the people of Gaza as well, because they are suffering terribly. Israel does its best to avoid civilian casualties. Hamas does its best to inflict civilian casualties. When Israel inflicts civilian casualties, the nation grieves. When Hamas inflicts civilian casualties, their people celebrate. Iran wants to kiss the hands of the ones who did it. So we're really comparing apples with oranges. So by all means, let us look at the situation in the Middle East where Israel does wrong, where Israel could treat Palestinians better. Let's address it. Let's talk about it together as moral people. But let us not make any moral equivalence comparison here. It would be like saying when the American soldiers were killing the Nazis, that was like the Nazis slaughtering the Jews. No, not so.
Dr. Michael Brown, we wholeheartedly agree that it is, our hearts are grieving for both sides. I mean, it's just so much trauma that's going on. I just want to ask you on a personal note, how is this affecting you as a Jewish believer? How is this, all this news that's unfolding, how is it impacting you in this moment?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We can all get desensitized. The war in Ukraine has been dragging on, slaughter of Christians in Nigeria happening on a regular basis, oppression of the Uyghurs in China. I mean, there's so much suffering around the world. We can become desensitized to it. Sorry, but some things just hit home differently. I've been to Israel many times. That friends of ours in Israel grieving and congregational members killed on the front lines, and everybody knows somebody who suffered. One of our friends sends out a newsletter and said our friends are texting from their house. They're terrorists in the house. They're terrorists in their house right now. Somehow they managed to hide and come out safely. Another family sends out a text, mom and dad, and their twin girls, 6, and their other daughter, 4. We made it into the bomb shelter. We're safe because there are bombs going off. Well, that was until the Hamas terrorists came in and butchered the whole family in cold blood. So I've been shedding a lot of tears. I've been in a lot of pain over this, and it's one of these horrific moments. What really grieves me is when I see Christians chiming in. Well, Israel deserves it. Well, they're Jew haters. Well, they're religious Jews who spat on Christians at tabernacles. Well, they're Antichrist spirit and the wrath of God is on them. They hold to these theologies that say God's finished with Israel, and it creates a disdain in their hearts for Israel. That's what troubles me just about as much as anything. And Jesus is coming back to Jerusalem. Why? Because God's not finished with Israel, and God still has purposes for Israel. And yes, my people need Jesus, and there's no salvation outside of Yeshua. That's true. That's a fact. But he's coming back when the Jewish Jerusalem welcomes him. And Isaiah 62 says, God says, give him no rest until he establishes Jerusalem as the praise of the whole earth. So the whole church should also be praying for Jerusalem and for Israel.
Dr. Michael Brown, thank you for what you shared. So heartfelt. And just want to let you know that if I could give you a hug right now and just with the tears that I know, just so hard what you're going through and just hearing these stories of just atrocities. I think there's just a moment, I think, for all of us that we're just stunned and there's such a lack of words. But we just want to say that we love you, that we're standing with you, and we are praying. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your heart, your wisdom, and your perspective.
Thank you. And that means the world to me. I appreciate it.